The second session is about the influence of Russian Orthodox Church in spreading these, what we call here, post-liberal narratives, but basically the Russian influence during the last decade or so. I'm aware of the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church influence, but this is for the first time for our Croatian audience to hear that, especially our students. So you see the half of our auditorium here. The second half is on the other side. You can't see now, but they can join with questions. Without me talking too much, I think you can start by introducing yourself, and we can go with the panel. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for taking your time.
I'll go first because I'm listed, certainly not because of my scholarship or intelligence or writing. I defer to Vladislav and Lucy, who I'm thrilled to be a panelist with because of their immeasurable work in this field, and my compliments to the two of them. So, good morning. Miholo Hurley Sanam Dom is Eranok Me is Americanahu. So Gurumahagith August Uktan Kurid. I open in my Irish language because, as you'll see in a minute, it's important to my presentation. Those people in the Baltics or throughout Eastern Europe know only too well how Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church have used the extermination of language, cultural identity, poetry, music, all the cultural touchstones as a way of not only trying to assimilate individual and free peoples throughout Europe, but to oppress them, to make them take on a Russian identity. I'm old enough to remember the Cold War very well. I was a young soldier during the Cold War. I did my scholarship and my first work in life during the Cold War. And I continue to talk to people who grew up in Eastern Europe who can't shake the idea that they have a Russian identity, even though ethnically, historically, culturally, linguistically, they had no relationship with Russia prior to imperial, colonial, or communist domination. So the recovery of national and personal identity, including linguistic identity, which I think is particularly important, is central to understanding why the Russian Orthodox Church today presents a threat to European security and democracy. Forgive me if I glance to my notes from time to time. By nature, I'm a defense and security analyst. I started life as a soldier in the special operations community in the American Army, although I'm Irish. I did my early scholarship in history, theology, and philosophy and law. I have experienced 7 wars, either as a soldier or as a journalist, and none have been so pernicious in my experience as the wars in Moldova, Georgia, and now Ukraine, which continue to plague us today. Other wars have always been as horrible. War by its very nature is anathema to what is best for the human experience. But it's the ability of Russia today to project its identity both philosophically, ethnically, religiously, and politically through misinformation and disinformation, and let's call it what it is, propaganda, that has become so problematic. The very tools which we thought would liberate human thinking have in some ways enslaved us. I, as an educated person, have a very big difficulty these days determining what I'm reading to be either authentic, manipulated, or wholly fabricated. And artificial intelligence has made it even worse. So it's very difficult for the average person to understand what's going on. And as the economy tightens, as things get more difficult across Europe, um, I think there's a tendency for the public to turn off information which they don't see as central to their lives, which is not easily understood simply because there's only so much time and attention. And this is the real danger. If you go back and do critical research, you will find a corollary between Russian state misinformation, propaganda, and the budget and expansion of the Russian Orthodox Church's external communications. They go in tandem. Where one budget grows, where staffing grows, it also grows within the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. That's not a mistake, it's by design. And we need to be very alert to what we're seeing and understanding who is propagating it, why they're propagating it, and what is their agenda. One of the things we need to reconcile ourselves with is that the Russian Orthodox Church exploits the very liberal values that the West has developed about the protection of religious freedom. There are seminal works in religious freedom. Um, Although not explicit, it begins with the Magna Carta guaranteeing freedoms from the royal prerogative. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, probably one of the finest pieces of political prose, also wrote the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. And that was the work he wished to be remembered for and wished to be on his tombstone, although that never happened. Religious freedom has been a central tenet of Europe ever since the beginning of the Reformation. I mean, the French resolution in 1789 of the rights of man and the citizen explicitly guarantee religious freedom. And that's true across Europe, except where it has been dominated by Imperial Russia, Tsarist Russia, communism. And even today, although those entities have disappeared, the Russian Federation, through its concept of Ruski Mir, wishes to protect that identity because it is the only wellspring outside of Russia by which Russia has direct influence over the European people. And therefore, we cannot discount the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church and its clergy and its activities outside of Russia. It's not a coincidence that Patriarch Kirill, the very man, the Moscow Patriarch, who declares the unorthodox and unholy concept of a holy war, began his early career outside of Russia as an envoy to the World Council of Churches in Geneva. The records in Geneva by the Swiss Secret Service, and I've seen them, clearly show in documentary and indisputable form that Kirill was a KGB officer working to pervert the World Council of Churches while he was supposedly there collaborating for world peace and tranquility. Today, we continue to find Russian Orthodox Church influence throughout Europe, subverting our institutions, our values, social cohesion, and thereby undermining the influence of liberal democratic societies and their support for the defense of Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and all of Europe. The ways in which the Russian Orthodox Church exert their influence in Europe are vast. They're meant to challenge the West, undermine social cohesion, cultivate whom we call the near abroad, those people living in Europe who previously had some tie to Russia, either historically, ethnically, genetically, culturally. And it's meant to promote dissension and political dialogue. The early panel spoke about Moldova in the three elections in which Russia has done its best to influence the Moldovan people, and they failed. You're probably already well aware of the invitation by Russia for Orthodox clergy in Moldova to visit Russia prior to last September's Moldovan elections. Upon their return to Moldova, they were given prepaid credit cards if they agreed to scrape Russian propaganda from Russian websites and post it on their church's social media, their websites, their own social media. And in compensation, some of them earned a year's worth of salary in a month's period for attempting to subvert the election. Of course, many of them did it in the hopes that they were promoting a Orthodox message that the Moldovan people should listen to. But in retrospect, many have already spoken to the media of how they were duped and that they were simply political instruments of the Russian Orthodox Church and Russia abroad. So we need to be very careful of when we see information, asking the question, what am I reading? Who does it come from? The who, what, where, and why of determining if we're looking at propaganda or general, if not well-meaning dialogue. One of the things that's difficult about the Russian Orthodox Church and identifying propaganda and subterfuge is that they hide in plain sight. They are in Europe, sometimes on specific visas, providing privileges to visiting clergy. They don't undergo the kind of scrutiny other citizens might in getting these visas. Or they might be Europeans who are aligned with the Russian Orthodox Church by faith, confession, or other means. And that identity sometimes clouds their judgment about their European values and their role as citizens. Ever since 2007, the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, it used to be a bastion of anti-communism. It reunited with the Moscow Patriarchate, which means that every Rokor bishop outside of Moscow, outside of Russia, must be approved by Patriarch Kirill. It's no surprise that we don't hear the condemnation of the kidnapping of Ukrainian children and their transport to Russia for reindoctrination, often living in Russian Orthodox Church monasteries, schools, and facilities, orphanages. We don't hear the condemnation of the mass graves in Bucha, in Izium, or the torture cells uncovered in Kherson upon its liberation, the rape, the pillage, the brutality of war, and the mistreatment of prisoners of war in Russian captivity. And those are things that are universal human values that every Christian bishop should condemn. And yet, the virtual, if not absolute, silence from Rokor bishops has been deafening in its silence. The number of Russian Orthodox clergy who have been punished for speaking out against this prayer of the Holy Rus, which endorses the unorthodox and unchristian value of a holy war. It's inexplicable. They are escaping the kind of critical condemnation and scrutiny that applied to Muslims who adhered to a kind of jihadist view of the world that began in the 1970s with the attempted takeover of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, existed in the Madras in Pakistan and Afghanistan, who were promoted by the likes of bin Laden, who existed under the so-called Islamic State in the Levant. And we need to ask ourselves as a society, why are we not more inquisitive of the Russian Orthodox Church's promotion of that same sense of religious conquest that we applied towards the Muslims? Now, it wasn't saying it was good for the Muslims, but we can't ignore the fact that the Russians seem to be getting a free pass on either their silence when it comes to human rights law or their silence when it comes to the promotion of naked aggression in the name of the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin's stated desire to rebuild what was essentially an imperial Russia. The Russian Orthodox Church, by any academic or critical analysis, are moral messengers for the Russian state. Consequently, Europe is considering sanctions against Russian Orthodox Church leaders, including Patriarch Kirill, something that wasn't possible until Viktor Orban was defeated in Hungary recently. It's still not certain, but something which is requisite because we cannot deny their role in what is happening in Europe. We need to also take a look at how the Russian Orthodox Church is behaving. They condemn corruption in Europe, singling out individuals at every turn. They do this through social media, through social influencing, through news releases, and it's always in concert with Russian state diplomacy. And yet at the same time, they're silent when it comes to the kind of corruption that happens in Russia. They talk about corruption in Europe as though it's rampant, and it's unacceptable at any level. But they fail to cite instances where if you fall out of favor with the Russian regime, you tend to fall out of windows. The lack of condemnation of murder, assassination, the arrest of journalists, the suppression of Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, Baptists, evangelicals, the Catholic Church in Russia and the temporarily occupied territories, the destruction of churches of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, are all meant to send a chilling message to everybody involved. They attack EU structures constantly, taking issue with EU structures which they say are meant to attack traditional values without any cognition of their own lack of understanding of traditional values. Excuse me. I also want to talk about international law. The Russian Orthodox Church continually attacks international law, and they've been railing against human rights for about 40 years. Ever back to the Soviet Union, the messaging really didn't change. They see all promotion of human rights as an abrogation of the law of God. Sometimes they stretch the imagination, but human rights and our belief in a divine creator and a just and good God aren't necessarily incompatible. But attacking institutions is a critical part of the Russian Orthodox Church's challenge to Europe and North America, South America, everywhere. I want to alert you to two things which the other presenters talked about because I think they're cardinal to our understanding. The co-option of the extreme left and the extreme right in Europe are part and parcel of the Russian Orthodox Church's co-option of the West for their own agenda, be it religiously or nationally for Russia. You'll see the far left be fed this information about the military-industrial complex, and the far left, especially here in Ireland, loathes the idea of a military Europe. So Russia talks about it constantly. I don't think many people know Ireland's history. We were dominated by the British for 800 years. They took our language, our culture. We are only recovering fragments of our poetry and music and literature still. We struggle for our own children to understand our own native Irish language. Most of Ireland works in English. But Russia was the first country, the Bolsheviks, to recognize Irish independence. And the Irish people have never ceased to be reminded of that, even though the values or the reasons by which Russia recognized Ireland and the Bolsheviks in 1917 have nothing to do with Irish values today. But it helps them co-opt the left. It also helps them co-opt the right, the nationalists who don't want to see an erosion of people or what they believe to be Irish values. For the first time, Europe has experienced in Ireland with inward migration. We've always fled our Ireland because of famine, exploitation, political inflicted hunger, like the Ukrainians with Holodomor. Um, and yet now the right sees the African face or an Asian face or an Indo-European face, a Muslim, as antithetical to Irish values. That is exacerbated by the Russian Orthodox Church and their narrative that Ireland is purposefully eroding our Christian heritage. I'm personally not challenged by the presence of a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or an atheist. It does not affect my values. It does not change Ireland's historic, traditionally Christian values and heritage. And yet it's amplified continually in pulpits by the Russian Orthodox Church here in Ireland. It's meant to attack not only our European outlook, but challenge the Irish government who makes immigration and the protection of vulnerable persons possible. This is done by mischaracterizations, misappropriation of information, and a distortion of history. My wife, Oksana Shadrina, with whom I recently wrote a book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, the Russian Orthodox Church's Threat to European Security and Democracy. It's published by Ibidem in Europe and Columbia University Press in America. We take a look at how history has been distorted to not only consolidate Russian imperial or political power, but how the Russian Orthodox Church has facilitated that for its own benefit. And today they continue to challenge European and politically Irish institutions because any weakening of those institutions is to their benefit, even if it's to the detriment of our state. So history, context are critical. Let me just close by going through a quick history, and I'm sure Lucy and Vladislav will do a much better job. We need to remember context because it's everything. Russia, and Vladimir Putin in particular, projects this nationalistic idea of Russia as having a monolithic history with a Russian identity. Nothing could be further from the truth. It really starts at its roots with the Principality of Muscovy, a Genghisid adherent. They were a vassal of Genghis Khan and his ancestors. And when the Jenghisids retreated and fell, they needed a new identity, so they reinvented themselves as Europeans. They got the Russian Orthodox Church to dip into mythology and history, and they used the mythological Rurikids to ground themselves with a European identity, which was part and parcel of their co-opting of the identity as the Kievan Rus. I mean, this idea, and all you need to do is pick up a map, that the Kievan Rus fled to Moscow would not only mean that they fled into active combat zones in the 12th century, but they chose to cross swamps which are inhospitable to human life, either in summer or winter. So the idea that the Kievan Rus as a people migrated to Russia is just impossible to reconcile with the historic account. But Russia co-opted that history because it was to their benefit and to the Russian Orthodox Church's benefit. The reason we have a patriarch in Moscow is because the czars took the ecumenical patriarch, weakened after the rise of the Ottomans and the fall of Constantinople, and virtually imprisoned him in Moscow until he created a Moscow Patriarchate. And even then, they asked to ascend to the highest center of the patriarchs, the historic patriarchs of Christendom. And they dipped into again these visions of a mad monk who saw Moscow as the center of Christian life after the fall of Constantinople. So they really truly want to be the center of Christian life, the defender of Christian ideas. And we constantly see both the Russian state and the Russian Orthodox Church projecting this idea that the ecumenical patriarch is not the senior of the equal bishops of historicity, but rather Moscow should be recognized as the center of Christian life. That's a very dangerous idea, but it supports both the Moscow Patriarch and the Russian state. So the idea of Russia really doesn't begin either linguistically or culturally or politically until 1721, when Imperial Russia was devised. It's a much newer political construct than uh, almost the same as the United States, almost the same as a republic in France. So this idea of a Russia rooted in long history that is the mother of all Slavic nations. This is a political projection and not uh, a historically correct idea. But it also feeds into the idea that all of the peoples of Eastern Europe and the Baltics truly are Russian descendants. And that just doesn't sit with history. Although I will say in the West, it was the history that was taught throughout the Cold War because the West adopted a history that was antithetical to Bolshevism, and that history was an imperial history. So in modernity, we have a responsibility to re-educate the young through good scholarship. And whether it's in Zagreb or Oslo or in Kiev or anywhere in Europe, we know that recovery of our own independent history and identity and culture and values and political understanding uh, is central to defending against the Russian Orthodox Church's appropriation of this imperial, if not communist history, and the way they want to continue to project it as a reason why we should be friendly to Moscow. So let me just close by saying that I believe we have a serious problem in that, and it's something I don't think even Ukrainian diplomats, with all respect, really understand. Keeping Europe on side of Ukraine isn't just a matter of adopting the political outlook of Europe towards a free and independent Ukraine. Um, but sustaining it requires the will of the people. And we've seen the United States fall away from their support for Ukraine. We've seen, whether it's from Germany or all across Europe, there's been a difficulty marshaling political power to sustain the commitment to Ukraine. So we need to take a look, a hard and critical look at how the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian state is using propaganda and misinformation and crafting the near abroad within Europe, not to adhere to religious values or theological certainties or philosophical dialogue, but how the Russian Orthodox Church is playing an outsized role and promoting a political message to undermine Europe, to shore up their defenses, as much as Ukraine is fighting on the battlefield as the bulwark of European security and democratic and independence values. The Russian Orthodox Church is conversely working against it, as is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, their um, partner in Ukraine, despite their objections. So, to be clear, the seminal works undermining European values and our framework of democracy in creating the European Union and its institutions, those were all democratically done. And yet, I sat in a Russian Orthodox church in 2017 after the invasion of Crimea in eastern Ukraine, before the full onslaught of the war. And the Russian Orthodox priest scolded us in a political dialogue, not a preaching on the Gospels, about how European institutions are unelected civil servants in Europe, changing European individual values. And that's just not so. It's a common narrative. It works on both the left and the right wing outliers here in Europe. But the truth of it is, we created those institutions. I regularly vote for my member of the European Parliament, who extends that franchise into the European Commission. I've participated by giving evidence in the European Union. We aren't being co-opted by unaccountable, unknown civil servants in some diabolical scheme. We are expressing our democratic values in Europe, and those are working to sustain our very common and collective goals as Europeans. We may not always agree as Irish people with the Germans, the French, or anyone else in Europe, but collectively we come to an understanding. And that's how democracy, that's how civil society works. It's how international law works. And until we get to a point where the Russian Orthodox Church is willing to throw up its hands and say, this idea of a holy war, our silence on mass murder, the kidnapping of children, the exploitation and passportization of a free people to make them Russian, and the co-opting of the near abroad to support Russia is wrong. We can't sit secure as a European civilization. And I think for that reason, we need to be vigilant about the Russian Orthodox Church's role in Europe, not on religious grounds, because freedom of religion needs to be absolute. But neither can we be blind or ignorant to the fact that our laws and values about freedom of religion were never intended to mask political propaganda and the undermining of our individual values as a society. I'm Miceal O'Hurley. Thank you for inviting me to the University of Zagreb Dialogue with the PR Army. I'll answer any questions you have after the break. But
thank you, Dr. O'Hurley. Thank you for this lecture and your expertise. It was a pleasure having you here and listening what you said. Actually, your book and Lucy's book also is on the list that we are going to order here at the university. Yes, thank you. And I'm happy and looking forward to reading as soon as possible.